Welcome to my library, dear guest. My name is Ko, and I will be your storyteller. Today, I will read 2 different stories to you. One about a DM who cannot grasp the concept of being non-binary, and the second where a player's class was misinterpreted and overlooked. I hope you enjoy. Story number 1. An Adventurous League Experience by the author Queeser. Hello all. These events took place a little over 2 years ago, and describe some of the things I experienced when part of an Adventurous League group. As such, some details/chronologies might be a little messed up, but I will try to do my best to be as truthful as possible. Everyone shall be referred to by their classes, as to protect the identities of both the guilty and the innocent. This took place at a game shop in a city where I no longer live. At the time, I was still relatively new to the hobby, and did not yet know that no D&D was better than bad D&D. But in hindsight, I should have known. If you all like this story, there are 2 others I can share. The cast: Fighter, a dwarven fighter; Sorcerer, a halfling shadow magic sorcerer; Cleric, myself, a turtle light domain cleric; Bard, a half-elf college of lore bard; Paladin, a tiefling oath of vengeance paladin, if I remember correctly; and DM, the dungeon master. We were, at the time, running an Out of the Abyss campaign, and were mostly a higher level party, 8 or higher, so a tier 2 table in terms of Adventurous League rules. Because of how Adventurous League worked, Paladin was newly 5th level, so he had just moved up from tier 1, but we were welcoming to Paladin. Now, at the beginning of the session, I decided to reveal that my cleric was agender, and was using they-them pronouns. It wasn't a big part of the character, just something I thought might bring a little flavor to the table. It came about by Paladin referring to my character as he. Me, in character. I prefer they, and I am right here. Paladin, in character. Oh, alright. DM, interjecting. The fuck? Me, out of character. My character is agender. They don't strongly identify with being male or female, and as a monastic they don't see their gender as being that important compared to how they serve their god. DM. That's not a real thing. Funny to say that at a table where we're rolling dice and there isn't a single human among the player characters. Sorcerer, interjecting. It is a real thing. Me. Doesn't impact mechanically how my character plays. Why would the pronouns my character uses be an issue? DM. It's an issue because you have to be either male or female. The rules say so. I roll my eyes, but I didn't, at the time, have a copy of the Dungeon Master's rulebook, and didn't want to pause the gameplay for an issue specific to my character. Let me interject here for a moment. The rules, at least 5e rules, support you not conforming to gender roles, including non-binary characters. On page 121 of the Player's Handbook, it says as follows. You don't need to be confined to binary notions of sex and gender. The elf god Corellon Lorethian is often seen as androgynous, for example, and some elves in the multiverse are made in Corellon's image. You could also play a female character who presents herself as a man who feels trapped in a female body, or a bearded female dwarf who hates being mistaken for a man. Likewise, your character's sexual orientation is for you to decide. The rules are written in a way to be as inclusive as possible, so what this DM said here is utter nonsense. but we're not quite done with this one. I suppose this was partly on me, but until this point, most characters have addressed my turtle by name, and turtle names are unisex. We continued on, but the rest of my fellow players, when referring to my cleric without using the cleric's name, were kind enough to use they-them pronouns. DM:
Call the cleric either he or she. I won't have gender fuckery at my table.
Bard, out of character:
I don't see what the big deal is. Does it really matter what pronouns cleric uses?
DM:
Fine. You come across an army of 50 dark elves.
Now, with where we were in the campaign, we were used to dealing with bigger challenges. We had dealt with demons, purple worms, and some fairly challenging puzzles. However, the suddenness with which this army of dark elves came upon us felt like a punishment for the table. The thing is, between light domain spells such as Wall of Fire and Fireball, and the Channel Divinity, Bard's magical secrets, which included Crusader's Mantle and Erupting Earth, and Sorcerer's spells, Storm Sphere and Cone of Cold, we had all sorts of area of effect and crowd control options. Even with a negative dex mod, my turtle was able to put up a wall of fire that disrupted half of the DM's army. It seemed that every opportunity for the next 2 rounds, DM would use any chance he could to have an attack focused on my cleric. Now, with a shield, my turtle's AC was 19, and they had a magic item that gave them an additional +1 to AC, making my turtle something of a tank. Whenever I told the DM that an attack missed, I think I remember DM's face getting a little redder. And when DM did hit, Bard would swoop in with cutting words, making DM's face an even darker shade of red. There are many reasons why DM might have been trying to hit my cleric. After all, the wall of fire that was preventing them from bringing the rest of an army against us was made by me. It felt like more than that, though. When the concentration did drop, because I eventually did get hit and failed the Constitution saving throw, the DM basically cackled with glee. The thing is, Sorcerer later told me from where he was sitting that he saw the DM's finger move after the dice had landed, so it would be nudged up to ensure a hit. However, sadly for the DM, Sorcerer was able to get in a large area of effect spell. I don't remember which one, and I followed it up with a fireball that did decent damage and half the remaining dark elves. The encounter ended, and rather than remain at the table, I left with Sorcerer, Fighter, and Bard. We talked for a bit, and while I was going to be moving, so I was already going to have few days left to play at that particular location, we all agreed to move on to other tables. There is a happy ending to this, however, as during COVID I reconnected with Fighter and Sorcerer, and we have been doing a Rime of the Frost Maiden account over on Roll20, where I am the DM. I always do my rolls in the open, so my players know I am being honest with them, and I try not to target any one player too much. Well, as I mentioned before, the rules do not mention anything about not being able to play non-binary characters and, in fact, support it. This was purely the DM's own disdain for non-conforming gender roles, which is sad, especially for someone who uses they-them pronouns themselves. But I am happy to see that the story had a happy ending, and that the author didn't keep coming to the table after that experience, even having his friends to back him up. It's great to see. Now, let us get on to story number 2. The GM Who Tried to Make the Fighter Fall, by the author, Colton. So, this interesting tale starts with a close friend of mine inviting me to a new campaign her brother was running. I was wary, having heard he is very draconic about paladins and frequently even has clerics lose their powers. which I'm fine with. Also, I have heard that he despises martial classes and really prefers his martials to still use magic in some way. A problem for myself because I like playing a fighter. Nonetheless, she convinced me that I should give it a go, and I had a character type in mind. We started at first level, and the GM only asked us for some vague information about our characters. He wanted a flexible backstory so he could fit it into his world. Not a problem. So I told him that I was a lawful good dwarf that was devoted to Torog and sought purity through faith, as well as general stone-loving dwarven goodness. Maybe a bit cliché, but I see less and less of the old-school dwarves, particularly in Pathfinder, as I have seen more dwarven bards and even dwarven sorcerers than fighters or barbarians. I arrived at the game with the Paladin Code of Torok printed out with my character sheet as a personal guide on how to be more devout. The adventure was fairly simple, but well run and pretty interesting until there was a situation where slaves were involved. We found a group of escaping slaves attacking their slave master. My friend and I, playing a healer from Old School 3.5, went to try to defuse the situation. The slaver screamed that he had a permit for the slaves, and demanded that we return them to the king so they can be sacrificed. Seeing children in the lot, I flat out said no, and asked the healer to tend to the slaves while I tended to the slaver. I took a trait that gave me healing as a skill. The DM told me that as a lawful good character, I should respect the authority of the slaver, to which I replied, I am the good lawful good, not the lawful lawful good. I don't recognize the legitimate authority of those that keep slaves. He seemed aggravated, but also a little elated. Soon, the ranger, who said he was going to hide in the trees and observe, alerted us to approaching men bearing the same seal as the slaver, causing the slaver to say something like, "This is the end for all of you. I will see that you are sacrificed right with them." The ranger, being chaotic neutral, aka evil, straight up killed the guy and dragged him off to hide in the bush. I sighed and verbally reprimanded him, but didn't do anything else as the healer started to lead the slaves away. I stayed with the body and knelt down in prayer, waiting for the men to approach. When they did, they saw my character praying with a holy symbol before the body, and asked what had happened. Politely, I might add. I told them that I had been traveling alone when I came upon bandits loading slaves into a wagon and gutting the slaver. Unable to follow them immediately, I decided to give the slaver his last rites. The GM looked shocked, like I had just told him I had eaten 5 Asmore babies alive, and set to roll for bluff. I roll a 16. I have a 14 charisma, and yes, as a dwarf, it is painful to waste a 16 in point build. And he said that they believed me. When they thanked me and asked which way the bandits went, I pointed them to the wrong direction. Once again, the GM was shocked. They loaded the man's body, tried to give me some gold for some reason, I refused it politely, and stormed off. The GM said that I began to feel weak and empty, that I felt my gifts start to leave me. To which I asked, "What gifts?" He said, "You lied, which is directly against the wishes of Torog." To which I replied by showing him Torog's code, in which it says, I can mislead others for my people. I lied for the sake of my party, and for good. He said, be that as it may, you lied wantonly with no remorse, and that I had fallen. To which I said, what do you mean? I am not a paladin. He did not believe me and asked to see my sheet. To which I complied, and he saw that I made the crazy saves against his magical ray traps at the start of the adventure, not because of divine grace, but because of steel soul, and that I had not let the ranger be blatantly evil because I am lawful good, not because I have a paladin code. I explained that I merely was faithful and had printed out the code for reference. He just sat there for a while and said, Okay. Then we moved on. Long story, not important, but I was kind of laughing the whole time during the end, and I thought it was interesting. Now, this story isn't really as much horror as it's just fun. For reference, this story has not been posted in r/rpghorrorstories, but rather in an inactive thread on the Paizo message board, and was simply edited for grammar mistakes and reposted by the user Life Out of Balance. So it isn't really as horrifying, which personally I am thankful for every once in a while. The DM lit up, and it all ended there, no harm done. I am also glad the author received a warning about the DM's playstyle beforehand. For example, personally, I do not take alignments as seriously, nor does the group I play with. So this would have probably taken me by surprise. But here, in the end, it all turned out fine and just became a one-off, kind of funny moment. That was it for today's stories. I hope you enjoyed your stay and that I will see you again soon. For there are always more stories to be shared.